So it's Roundup herbicide that's specially formulated for big jobs.
That's the new one.
On this one it says biodegradable.
That's the old one. It doesn't say biodegradable anymore, so it must no longer be biodegradable. It's the same product. I imagine they don't have the right to say it anymore. It must not really be biodegradable.
Be careful not to spray it in my face.
Oh, I'm not a murderer.
Monsanto. For 20 years I've traveled the globe, and everywhere I've heard about this American multinational. A Washington Post article from 2002. Monsanto hid decades of pollution. It happened in Anniston, Alabama.
Terry was my baby brother. He died in 1971 from a cancer of the brains, or a tumor of the brains, cancer of the lungs, and hers of the heart. He was 16. In the last 3 years, I have lost more friends. They died from illnesses, cancer, sugar diabetes, hepatitis, all these different ailments that comes with PCBs, and they have been related to PCBs. This is Monsanto Road. This is all just a black area, minorities that live in this area. But every one of these homes was like contaminated. They just cleaned that yard up over there to the right about 6 months ago. These was all homes. These people lived here, and they had to move. The houses was torn down. My brother fell dead right around the house. This is the house I was raised in. See this grass right here? They buried PCBs over here. Monsanto got permission to bury PCBs in Anniston. And this is Snow Creek right here, where they put the cement in here. It comes from the plant discharging PCBs all the way down through here. And it was poisoning. They never told anybody, but they told the state. The state didn't tell us.
PCB Monsanto knew, but what exactly did they know? An environmental organization in Washington, D.C., headed by Ken Cook, has put internal Monsanto files online. Most of them are classified confidential. FYI and destroy. 1937, exposure to PCBs provokes systemic toxic effects and acne-form skin eruption. In 1961, 2 workers developed hepatitis symptoms after a pipe broke in a factory using PCBs. In 1966, Monsanto scientists placed fish in Snow Creek's water. All were dead in 3.5 minutes. Pollution, a letter addressed to sales executives in 1970.
This is the one that really tells you the story. They're saying, we can't afford to lose $1 of business. Their neighbors in Anniston were not told about the poisoning that they were inflicting upon them because they didn't want to lose $1. It was only when lawyers went to court on behalf of people in Anniston and forced the company through the legal system to disclose these internal secret documents that we knew what they knew. They knew the truth from the very beginning. They lied about it. They hid the truth from their neighbors. They hid the truth, in many cases, from the government authorities. And when they did share information with government authorities that should have been acted upon, the government authorities, instead of siding with the people who were being poisoned, sided with the company. They sided with Monsanto. It was outrageous, absolutely unforgivable.
That's a horrible story. But what do scientists think about it? On the web, you can find numerous articles concerning the effects of PCBs on human health. David Carpenter is one of the most qualified specialists in the field. He carried out the testing for the Anniston residents.
We all have PCBs in our bodies. The polar bears and the penguins have PCBs. And what has happened is in the past, there were a few sites where PCBs were released, but over time, they've gone into the air, they've gone into the water, they've transported, so the whole world is now contaminated with PCBs. The issue is that many diseases are caused by PCB exposure. The one everyone knows about is cancer.
Roundup biodegradable. Ken Cook was right. The company was found guilty of false advertising. Twice. The first time was in New York in 1996. And the second was in France just last year. The judges found that the wording biodegradable, leaves the soil clean, and respects the environment were false advertising. Especially since, according to tests performed by Monsanto itself, only 2% of the product had broken down after 28 days. That's why Monsanto recently removed the word biodegradable from its containers. But that's not all. Many scientific studies have shown that Roundup is highly toxic. For example, Roundup provokes cell division dysfunction, a study by Professor Robert Bellet. But just how are GMOs regulated in the United States? The most crucial policy on the subject was published by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, which is legally responsible for regulating the safety of food and medicine. Title: Foods derived from new plant varieties. Date: May 29, 1992. Principle 1. Foods derived from genetic modification are regulated within the existing framework that applied to foods developed by traditional plant breeding. Obviously, the FDA decided not to create a special category for GMOs. For further information, contact James Mariansky, who headed the biotechnology department at the time.
Basically, the government had taken a decision that it would not create new laws, that it felt there were already sufficient laws in place that had enough authority for the agencies to deal with new technologies.
That means the White House asked the agency to write a policy where GMOs should not be submitted to a specific regulatory regime? But it's not based on scientific data. It's a political decision?
Yes, it was a political decision. It was a very broad decision that didn't apply to just foods. It applied to all products of biotechnology.
Unbelievable. James Mariansky admits that GMO regulation was based on politics rather than science. How exactly did they justify their decision? Principle 2. The components of food as a result of genetic modification of a plant will be the same as or substantially similar to substances commonly found in food.
So Monsanto played that game very well, both the political game and the regulatory game. They played a key role in bovine growth hormone in getting that thing approved, and also in how genetic engineering was dealt with.
Michael Hansen has just mentioned bovine growth hormone. What's that? It's a transgenic hormone that's injected into cows, increasing dairy production by 20%. It would be an understatement to say that it had critics. The hormone threatens our health. Deadly poison. Manipulation. Called RBGH for recombinant bovine growth hormone, Monsanto began selling it to dairy farmers in 1994 under the brand name Posilac.
Posilac is the single most tested new product in history. You'll soon see the dramatic results Posilac can offer you.
In 1985, Monsanto submitted Posilac to the FDA for market approval. The experts at the FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine reviewed the studies that the company had carried out on experimental herds. At the FDA, the veterinarian in charge of reviewing the data was Richard Burroughs. In an interview, he stated that agency officials had suppressed and manipulated data. In 1990, Samuel Epstein published an article in The Milkweed, the standard for dairy reporting, edited by Pete Hardin. The scoop was based on the secret documents that the two men scrutinized.
One morning, I think in October of that year, I came into my office and found a great big box of documents. And it came from Washington, but no indication as to who sent it. This was a box of files of all Monsanto records which had been submitted to the FDA on the veterinary tests in the preceding 6 years or so. Well, this was great fun.
Many of these documents are original documents, and as it says here, company confidential. It contains confidential information which may not be reproduced, revealed to unauthorized persons, or sent outside the company without proper authorization. As an investigative journalist, that's the kind of stuff I like to report. Revealing this information made Monsanto and FDA very, very angry, because what we were able to establish is that there were dramatic physiological changes in the animals that received the shot, the hormone shots, compared to their control group peers. For example, we see the ovaries of the cows receiving the synthetic hormone in the different treatment groups were, for the right ovaries, 34% larger, 42% larger, and 44% larger. Elsewhere in the stolen files, it shows how there were severe problems with the reproduction of these treated animals.
For Monsanto, the hormone is not only safe, it is actually beneficial for consumers. Because the chemical composition of the milk is not altered as a result of Posilac, the manufacturing and taste properties do not change.
It's untrue or a lie, whatever adjective you want to use. It's a very different product. It's a very, very different product in many, many ways. First of all, as there's a high incidence of mastitis in the cows, there'll be pus in the milk. And then you'd find antibiotics given to the cows to treat the mastitis. So a wide range of antibiotics would be in the milk. Apart from that, and very, very importantly, very substantial increases in levels of IGF-1, or insulin-like growth factor 1. There have been a series of studies, somewhere in the region of 60, relating increased levels of IGF-1 and breast, colon, and prostate cancers.
Absolutely incredible. Are there other countries that have approved RBGH? Apparently, the hormone was banned in Europe and Canada. Canada? That's strange, because Health Canada usually models its decisions on the FDA's. RBGH, scandal at Health Canada. Monsanto accused of attempt to bribe Health Canada for RBGH. Dr. Hayden, I swear that the evidence I shall give on this examination... In October 1998, 3 scientists from Health Canada testified before a Senate commission in order to stop the approval of the transgenic hormone. The scandal was made public by whistleblower Dr. Shiv Chopra.
Shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. My question to myself was, what truth am I going to tell? The one I know, or the what the minister is telling me to tell? And that was my conflict.
I would ask each one of you, have any one of you been lobbied by Monsanto? Any one of you?
Dr. Hayden?
I did attend a meeting back approximately about, I believe, 1989-90, and Monsanto representatives had met with myself and my supervisor, Dr. Drennan, and my director, Dr. Messier, and at that meeting, an offer of $1 to $2 million was made by the company, and I don't know any more about what became of that, but my director indicated after the meeting that he was going to report it to his superiors.
How did Monsanto react?
Well, Monsanto did not deny that they made the offer of $1 to $2 million at this meeting. They later on tried to say, oh, this was an offer of research in Canada to do some more studies in cows in Canada or whatever.
Lawyer Stephen Drucker represents a coalition of nonprofit associations. He sued the FDA, forcing it to declassify its internal files on GMOs.
We received over 44,000 pages from the FDA's own files, and they revealed that the FDA has been lying to the world since 1992, if not before. But they continue to lie. They are still lying. They claim that there's an overwhelming consensus in the scientific community that genetically engineered foods are as safe as their conventionally produced counterparts, and they claim that there has been sufficient data to back up this consensus. Both of those claims are blatant lies. There are several examples. For instance, Dr. Louis Priebel of the FDA's microbiology group wrote, quote, "There's a profound difference between the types of unexpected effects from traditional breeding and genetic engineering," unquote. Then Dr. Priebel added in his memo that some of the aspects of genetic engineering may be more hazardous. The concern expressed by the FDA's various scientific experts was so clear and unmistakable that the FDA official whose job it was to track and summarize the scientists' input, Dr. Linda Call, wrote a memo to the FDA biotechnology coordinator, Dr. James Mariansky.
According to the internal FDA's files, which have been declassified now, there were many in-house critics, among the scientists of the FDA, about the proposed policy. I have, for instance, a memorandum sent to you by Linda Call.
Right. She stated, the processes of genetic engineering and traditional breeding are different.
Traditional breeding are different, and according to the technical experts in the agency,
they lead to different risks.
Different risks.
The point was that we had many people with many different views. Linda Call, of course, wrote that in her memo, but in fact, when we finished the policy, all the scientists agreed with the policy. Now, FDA, of course, looked at the use of genetic engineering and has no information that simply the use of the techniques creates products that differ in safety or quality.
Even before the consistent warnings in the memos from the FDA's own scientists, the FDA had very clear warning because the very first genetically engineered food supplement that came to market in the United States caused a major epidemic.
Do you remember what happened in '89 with L-tryptophan? Do you remember?
Yes.
It was a bioengineered amino acid. We know very well what's amino acid and...
Right. That killed dozens of people and made hundreds and hundreds sick.
It caused an epidemic of an unusual disease called EMS.
Right.
And how many people died?
Right, but we have many...
37, and more than 1,000 people disabled. Do you remember?
I do
and
remember.
You said, according to FDA administrative record, we do not yet know the cause of EMS, nor can we rule out the engineering of the organism. Did you say that? What I read?
Yes.
The Arpad Pusztai scandal triggered a massive rejection of GMOs in Great Britain, led by Greenpeace. A year later, Robert Shapiro, Monsanto's CEO at the time, agreed to participate in a teleconference organized by the environmental organization. This is the only existing video footage of the former CEO. He was responsible for moving the company into the biotechnology era with its new slogan, Food, Health, and Hope.
Monsanto made huge efforts to push its products in every direction with the full support of multinational food manufacturers, retailers, communications firms, regulators, even governments. You behave not as a company offering life and hope, but as bullies, trying to force your products on us.
The story began in Nitro, in a Monsanto factory that produced a powerful herbicide called 2,4,5-T. In 1949, an explosion in the factory provoked unexpected side effects. 228 workers developed an extremely disfiguring illness called chloracne. It's caused by dioxin, which is a highly toxic byproduct of 2,4,5-T. .2,4,5-T was the main ingredient in Agent Orange, the defoliant used by the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War. During the war, 40 million liters of Agent Orange, containing 400 kilograms of pure dioxin, were sprayed on trees in southern Vietnam. 3 million people were contaminated, including thousands of American soldiers. Even some 40 years after the end of the war, dioxin continues to claim more victims. We know today that this poison provokes cancer and serious genetic malfunctions. The reality seems much less idyllic. The Center for Food Safety in Washington, D.C. published a study on farmers sued by Monsanto for having not respected its seed patents. It found at least 100 lawsuits and many bankruptcies. Among the victims, Troy Rush, an Indiana farmer.
Our story starts back in 1999. A gentleman, and I use that term loosely, showed up at my mother and father's farm, and he claimed to be a private investigator hired by Monsanto. And he was out investigating farmers saving their own seed, and asked us, he'd come right out and ask us if we'd saved their seed. And we told him no, we had not, and offered up our herbicide purchases and seed purchases, all the receipts and everything. Told him where everything was purchased so he could go check it out for himself. He declined that offer. And what occurred is then they sued us. Monsanto filed a lawsuit against myself, my father, and my two brothers. And Monsanto presented us with documents that they claimed were samples taken from our farms. To obtain those samples, Monsanto had to have trespassed upon our land without our permission and stole those samples. That year, I recall we had 492 acres of Roundup Ready soybeans. And they were grown under contract for a company for seed. And the contract was very specific. It spelled out the specific fields, so it wasn't a problem in isolating those fields. Everybody knew it.
And why did you settle out of court with Monsanto?
Well, after 2.5 years of this, the family was just destroyed. The stress involved in this, I mean, they're in essence threatening 5 generations of work. And if they would to prevail on something like this, it's all gone. They take it all away. They take it all away.
In the beginning, Vandana Shiva's battle was against the first Green Revolution, which brought industrial agriculture to India in the 1960s. Today, she denounces what she calls the second Green Revolution, that of GMOs protected by patents.
The difference is that the first Green Revolution was public sector driven. It was driven by government agencies. The government agencies control the research. In the case of the second Green Revolution, it is driven by Monsanto. It is a Monsanto-driven revolution. The second big difference is that the first Green Revolution did have a hidden objective of selling more chemicals. But its first objective was providing food. It was food security. And yes, they grew less pulses, they grew less oilseeds, but they did grow more rice and wheat. It fed people. The second Green Revolution has nothing to do with food security. It's not about food security. It is about returns to Monsanto's profits. That's all it is about.
According to a study led by Berkeley professor Dr. Ignacio Chapela, GMOs have already contaminated Mexican corn. But when the scientific journal Nature published the study's findings, it triggered a violent controversy. A transgenic world already exists in South America, where 100 million acres of Roundup-ready soybeans were planted in 2007. Their conquest started 10 years ago in Argentina, the only country to have officially authorized transgenic crops. Since then, GMOs have mysteriously spread to neighboring countries like Brazil and Paraguay, seen here. In 2005, Paraguay finally legalized these smuggled crops to save their soybean exports to Europe, where labeling GMOs is obligatory. In reality, for the Ministry of Agriculture, the deed had already been done. Today, Roundup is sprayed all over Paraguay by plane or mechanical spreaders driven by unprotected farm workers. The herbicide is sprayed right up to people's front doors or near the subsistence crops of small farmers. Every year, crops are destroyed and thousands of people contaminated. Like this family, which is surrounded by Monsanto's GMOs. The parents are worried about their son Pedro because every day he has to cross the soybean fields to sell his mother's homemade corn tortillas.
How long has he had that?
It started 15 days ago. It started on his foot and then it spread. That's how it starts.
Does he have a headache?
Is he eating? Very little. Today he didn't want to eat what I prepared for him. He only drank a little fruit juice.
And his brother?
He eats better, but it's difficult.
Chris Horner.
Hello, Christopher Horner. I'm Marie-Monique Robin from France.
Yeah, we appreciate your persistence in asking, but we've had several conversations internally about this and have not changed our position, so there's no reason for us to participate. Our suspicion is that it would not be positive. So,